Hello everyone, welcome back to my workbench up here in the study at Donget's Model Railway. Let's have a look at Accurascale's Mk2B coaches. I had a couple of these arrive recently and they failed their acceptance trials with a couple of annoying problems. I think I might have a bit of a controversial opinion here. There are circles within the hobby that say Accurascale can do no wrong and are not to be criticised. Keep watching to see my experience with these coaches and what problems I identified that need addressing. After a long wait, the Accurascale Mk2B is finally here. This was an excellent choice of model for Accurascale, hitting a big gap in the market. The only other ready-to-run Mk2B coach is an ancient Lima model, which does not hold up in today's market, and the similar Mk2C, which Accurascale are also producing to be delivered soon, has never been produced in ready-to-run before. It's one of the few missing links in BR-era loco-hauled passenger train modelling. Plus, with the Irish connection, these coaches were obvious candidates for a joint IRM Accurascale project. It's a well-executed model. The essence of the Mk2B has been captured. In a mixed rake with Bachmann Mk2A coaches, the bits that should look the same do look the same, and the bits that should look different, like the revised ends with wraparound doors and longer vestibules, do look correctly different. That also applies when pictured next to a Bachmann Mk2F, which share the wraparound doors and larger vestibules but have totally different windows. The factory lighting in these coaches is a subtle effect, not overly bright. Under bright external light, it can be a challenge to see from the outside if the lighting is on at all. That's actually a realistic choice, and I don't consider it a problem, although I'm sure some people would prefer a brighter light for more play value when turning the lights on and off. Lighting control is done with a magnetic wand waved over the centre of the coaches. This isn't my preference, and I would prefer DCC controlled lighting like on the Bachmann Mk2Fs. However, the killer feature there was the door lock lights on Swallow and later stock. As Mk2Bs do not have these, there's less of a requirement to change the lights during operation, and the magnetic wand approach is an acceptable compromise which allows the lights to be switched off while stabled and maintains better DC compatibility. Thankfully, the lights are powered from bogie-mounted pickups and not from an onboard battery. This means they do trigger my block detectors from factory, and I don't have to go digging into the coach instantly to add pickups. Battery-powered lighting is something I consider an anti-pattern, not something I want to see from any manufacturer. I've dealt with enough old electronics with leaky batteries damaging circuit boards. I don't want that in my trains too. Just fit pickups, please. There is a stay-alive capacitor fitted, which will cover a lot more than flicker from intermittent contacts. It offers a couple of minutes of light without external power. However, there's an annoying whine coming from the coaches when sat on my layout. It's been a bit difficult to catch with the camera as it's so high pitched it's not picking it up clearly. But with one powered and one unpowered section, and a lot of amplification, I did manage to capture this. It's not loud enough I can hear it over running trains. But it is sufficiently annoying that I can't leave the coaches on the layout if nothing is running. It's not the lights themselves, but the charging circuit for the stay-alive capacitor. Switching the lights off with the magnet doesn't stop the noise, but picking the coach up, even if the lights are still on, does stop it. Looking into it a bit further, this whining noise turns out to be specific to ABC. It's not at a noticeable level if I put the coaches in the engineer's yard, the first area of my layout where there's plain DCC power with no ABC or block detection. ABC on, ABC off. If they are reacting badly to ABC in this way, then it also stands to reason there may be other issues with ABC too. I've had problems with coach lighting interfering with ABC previously. See this video of mine if you want to know more about why that can happen. I have tested these coaches to see if they also exhibit that problem. Bearing in mind I only have 2 coaches and not a full train, I haven't seen any issues with trains failing to stop or starting to move when stopped so far. For example, this train is sitting at the entrance to the storage yard with the throttle open, being held by ABC, and has been for about half an hour now. I will test this again when I get some Mk2Cs, but I'm going to have to turn this off now as I'm starting to generate a headache from the whining noise being right next to me. There's a lot of detail on these coaches, mostly pre-fitted with a few bits in a separate bag. Not fitted by default are the brake hoses and a cosmetic drop knuckle, which if fitted would conflict with the functional coupling. The rest of the detail bag contains a variety of alternative pieces to replace pre-fitted components. There are longer versions of the buffers which can be swapped over to represent when the buffers are in use rather than the knuckle. In real life, the buffers are moved forwards and backwards, not swapped over completely, but this is good enough to reproduce the effect. For anyone asking about sprung buffers, the spring is only relevant when extended in real life. When two coaches are coupled together, the buffers aren't in use, so unsprung is fine on the model. Inside the bogie, there are separately fitted brake rigging details, but you can't see it unless you turn the coach over. Is this a worthwhile level of detail to be adding to coaches? I'm sure people feel good that it's there, but you can't see it when the train is on the track. Bachmann's Mk2Fs don't have it, and I don't miss it on those. What it does do is get in the way of swapping the couplings. It's much more difficult to get into the back of the pocket to squeeze the clip to disengage the coupler than it is on other models. And from the factory, these needed a helping squeeze, as they would not just pull out easily. I'm pretty sure I damaged one of the sets of brake rigging trying, but given this is entirely hidden detailing, I guess it doesn't matter as you can't really see it. Speaking of couplings, here's where the real problems start. Accurascale have publicly stated that the pockets on these are in the right place from factory. An obvious dig at Bachmann, who have famously struggled at getting pockets in the right place, with both incorrect heights and incorrect distances from the gangway across a lot of popular models. If the pockets are indeed in the right place from factory, then these Roco couplers will work. They operate kinda like tension locks. Bump the coaches together on flat straight track and they couple. Press up from underneath and the coaches come apart. But unlike tension locks, there's no slack movement in the couplers. All the coaches move together with no unrealistic telescoping, and if you do find any slack, it's in the close coupling mechanism, not in the coupler itself. Speaking of close coupling mechanisms, the couplers maintain alignment properly, so when the coaches go through curves, the close coupling mechanisms are operated properly and the coaches will not buffer lock, despite maintaining touching or almost touching gangways on straight track. These are the best couplings I've found for close coupled coaches, but they really do depend on the pockets being correctly placed. These Oxford Mark 3As do really well with these couplers. They work exactly the same as the European coaches do. They couple when bumped together, sit almost gangway to gangway touching on straights, and still go round tight curves. Aside from some quality control issues, particularly with the intercity Swallow livery, these are great coaches. The Accurascale Mk2Bs don't do this. Bumping the coaches together results in the gangways hitting each other before the couplings bottom out, and thus they don't couple. You can mess with them to get them coupled, and the visual effect of touching gangways on a straight but still being able to go around a second radius curve is great when it works. But it doesn't always work. Here the couplings have bound, pulling the train off the track. When disconnected, both of them still move smoothly, so it's something about how they are coupled. Let's have another look at that. If you are enjoying this video, or finding it useful, hit the like button. If you want to see more of my layout or the stock I run on it, hit the subscribe button. If you have a question, comment or suggestion, write it in the comment section below. Yes, it's completely repeatable. You can see how the coupling is kicked over to the inside correctly here, where the Mk2A is coupled. But the joint between the two Mk2Bs has not had the coupling move to the inside. It's stuck straight out on at least one of the coaches, and is now causing the ends of the coach to bind, which is why they've derailed. The issue is there's too much tension in the coupling, and it won't go over the centre point from one side of the movement range to the other. There's too much tension because the couplers aren't projecting beyond the gangways far enough. It's the same reason they don't couple when pushed together. If I flip the second to last coach around, it stops happening in this specific case. Unfortunately, that's not a proper fix. It just means that the issue has moved somewhere else instead. It also means I've got a combination or arrangement of coaches I can't use, and must keep track of to make sure I don't assemble accidentally. That's not a scalable solution. It would be much better to fix this properly. If you're about to call this a layout problem or a curve radius problem, let's take them down the club and see how they get on there. With both coaches the same way, that's a wheel off here. And another wheel off there.
I think that coach has derailed again.
Yeah, and he's not wrong, it's happened again. Sorry Accurascale, while the height of the pocket is correct, the distance from the gangway doesn't seem to be quite right. The pockets are just a touch too far back. We're talking fractions of a millimetre here, really not a lot, but enough to cause problems and to need solving. If it was right, these Roco couplings would just work, like they do with the Oxford Mark III's. There is an alternative coupler bar in the detail pack. This has shorter pockets, and there are some tension locks with matching under-length NEM clips to go with them. There's also a pocket extension collar, which you can put on a normal NEM coupling to bring the pocket back to the same length and position as the stock bar. The intention here is to be able to offer a proper close coupling while still using tension lock couplings. Accurascale did mention these coaches would be able to do that, although they likely had problems getting them to go around curves. Tension lock couplings do not maintain alignment between the pockets and are unsuited for use with close coupling mechanisms because of that. Hence Accurascale have shipped these with conventional size tension locks and the same 3-foot scale gap between the gangways everybody else's coaches also has. With the collar, the length precisely matches the stock bar, so swapping the bar over to the one in the detail bag and using the collar does not get me a different coupling length and will not help with this issue. There is a Hornby clone version of the Roco coupler. This version will couple to the Roco original, but is 2mm longer to cope with pockets that are set far too far back into the models. Putting the Hornby couplers in results in an unacceptably giant gap between the coaches. One Roco and one Hornby gets closer to being right, but then you've handed the couplings, so that the coaches have to be one specific way round. While handed couplings are an acceptable compromise when dealing with a fixed rake that is never decoupled, for coaches where you want to be able to split and form up trains, it's not something I find acceptable. Speaking of unacceptably handed couplings, a magnetic coupling is provided in the detail bag, but it's handed with a north and a south coupler. Properly done magnetic couplings have two little magnets in the end and are not handed, like Accurascale's own Delna coupler, for example, so they know how this needs to be done. I did get the coaches to run reliably, but only by putting a Bachmann Mk2A in between them. That's annoying, but something I can get away with in a mixed rake of Mk2A and Mk2B coaches. It's not something I would be able to get away with if I wanted to make a train of all Mk2Bs, or all Mk2Cs when my Mk2Cs arrive. As the coupler pockets are at the correct height and not too far off in depth, fixing them is pretty straightforward. I spaced the couplings out about 0.5 mm. To test this I use a couple of pieces of card, but later I'll make a plastic shim. It needed 2 thicknesses of card on each pocket for the couplers to start working properly. One was not enough. To get the tails of the coupler to engage properly, I needed to file a small slot in the back of the pocket of the same depth that I spaced out at the front. Otherwise the couplings will pull out of the front of the pockets the moment you put any tension on them. All in all, this is a good, but not excellent coach. It does need a bit of work put in before it will run correctly, particularly on the couplers. The whining noise from the lighting circuit is also annoying, and that will need looking into as well. However, on balance, so far I think it's my third favourite coach, behind Bachmann's Mk2F in first place and Oxford's Mk3A in second. Let me know in the comments below if you've got some of Accurascale's Mk2Bs and what you thought of them. Did you encounter any problems with them, or have they behaved perfectly for you? Perhaps you've got some suggestions for what I should be doing differently with mine to address the problems I've experienced. Or do you think the coaches I've received are faulty or not representative somehow? Also, what coaches would you like to see next from Accurascale? Personally, I think if they wanted to continue the Mk2 line, the Mk2D is the obvious candidate. The ex-Airfix Mk2D is long in the tooth and ripe for replacement. Moving away from the Mk2 line, I'd say a Gresley coach would be my other suggestion, as we haven't seen a really good one of those yet in 00 gauge, what with Hornby messing up the body shape and positioning of the beading. See you next time up here in the study at Donget's Model Railway.